want to make sure I record this so that we don't miss out. So Felecia Hogan has been a champion of diversity throughout her career and has a passion for helping people grow and improve both professionally and personally. She was named Savoy Magazine's 2023 Most Influential Executives in Diversity and Inclusion. Hogan has served as the board president of Commerce Bank's E2E, employee to employee, foundation, Commerce employee funded foundation that provides financial assistance to employees and their families in times of great need. She helped with the creation of VIBE, Commerce Bank's employee resource group, ERG, for multicultural team members, which she now acts as a sponsor. She also currently serves on the board of directors for the Center of Disability Inclusion and serves as the vice chair of the Mattie Rhodes Center in Kansas City. So please help me welcome Felecia Hogan.
All right. I hope you all are able to see my screen. Okay. Even in 2024, and we've survived the whole pandemic, and then I still have to ask if you can see my screen, and I'm seeing some nods of yes. It is a pleasure to be with you all, and I just want you to know that you're amongst friends today, because what I view this is a conversation about how we as business leaders in the business community can think more deeply about how we solve real world challenges. And what you're going to really hear from me today is sort of how Commerce has put together a strategy around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what I always say to people is there's no one size fits all. And so regardless as to if it is your business that you are running, if you are a part of an organization, regardless as the size, take some of the learnings that we've learned over the last probably 20 plus years and figure out tangible ways to embed those things as a part of culture. Before I start, I will say that I am not by myself. Not only do I see some of my colleagues from Commerce Bank, but I've got Nikki Storms, who leads our DI strategy and communications. And I can't present and do the chat. And so if there are questions, she is going to help me out, because hopefully we have space at the end where we can talk amongst friends and answer any questions. And so what I'm going to cover today is really around diversity, equity, and inclusion at Commerce, starting with why it's important to our culture. And culture is very important to any organization. We're going to talk about how it aligns with our mission and our values. We're going to do some of what we call our common language grounding, which means that, we need to know what we're talking about when we use the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you follow in any news, there's all kinds of definitions that people are using. But when we talk about it, as far as our efforts, I want to be intentional in how we view it. We're going to talk about the business case for why it even matters, why it's important to have a strategy. Because again, if you're leveraging culture, culture is about how you get results. And who doesn't want to be a part of a business or organization that is being intentional and thriving and being able to help their people be at their best? And so that's what we're going to talk about. And really, how do we make this work long-term and sustainable? So a quick overview about Commerce. We're nearly 160 years old. We're ranked number 42 out of US banks. And we call ourselves this super community bank. And it really is when we think about the experience, we want to take our large banking products and services, but we want to really go deeper into our local market with our knowledge and experience. We're dual headquartered out of St. Louis and Kansas City, and we've got footprints and branches across the Midwest. That's what you see in the dark green. But really, our story is we are a mid-sized employer with over 4,700 employees. And so when we talk about making culture work within an organization, how do you disseminate that down to that many people so that they understand what the organization's mission and purpose and values are? some of our accomplishments that we're really happy about, because it takes this village to go solve for some of these real world challenges, is we've been named, we've maintained a score of 90 or more for our human rights campaign efforts. We've won Champion of Diversity with some of our local chambers. We've been identified for Newsweek inaugural group of greatest workplaces to work for diversity. And we were recently named a leader in disability and inclusion. And nothing happens by chance. It is the work of so many people within our organization that sort of helped us achieve some of those goals. And again, because we're talking about culture, we have to really get to the heart of the organization and what it stands for. And that's what I hope that you all are thinking about, whether it's your own company or whether it's your employer, is you want to think about what's your purpose, what's your why for being here. And ours is that we help our customers and the community focus on what matters most. And we do that by really taking time to understand what our customers' financial challenges are through that consultative and solutions-based approach. And we want to tailor it and solve for the right thing. But in order to do that, you've got to be successful in supporting your own talent who are going out and who are doing some of that consulting. You've got to nurture an inclusive culture and an environment so that your employees want to live their core values. And I love our culture statement because it really is about creating this inclusive culture that drives results and encourages each team member to thrive and be their best. That takes a lot of intentional focus. And when we talk about our culture, we talk about it's a 160-year-old organization, but that we built it around our purpose and our core value because we want people who work collaboratively together in order to help us drive results. And when we think about what's the value of culture within an organization, if you're 160 years old or if you're 1 year old, it really is because you want to maintain your competitive advantage. You want to solve for your customers' needs. You want to remain viable and profitable. You want to help drive results. And so when I think about culture, it really is about how people work, how they behave and work together. It represents those habits and some of those unwritten rules that can impact really how you get work done. And it becomes a way of life for this group of people. So that when we think about our behaviors, when we think about our beliefs and our values, it's those things that are accepted. And we don't always have to give voice to them because culture actually gets passed along through communication and imitation. And so at Commerce, we talk about that leadership shadow or personal shadow. It really is less about what you say and it's more about what you do. And so if you look here, we kind of talk about some of the things that our culture is built upon, whether it's our ability to sharpen our culture, it's how we get work done with our projects, how we think innovatively with a growth mindset, how our training works. We want to invest in our talent at all levels of the organization. And then last but not least, we want to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because guess what? Our workplace is so diverse, and sometimes it's not always easy to see. And I mentioned level setting around common language understanding, because when we're using these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've got to be super intentional in understanding what it is we're talking about. And this chart represents you at an individual level. And when I said people are so different in a lot of ways, and it's not easy to see, this can be all of us. The biggest misconception about diversity is that it only pertains to gender and race. But it really is about this entire human experience when we've got this variety of ages and skills and personalities and abilities and culture and life experience. All of that comes together and it truly drives this diverse workforce. And sometimes we don't think about, where we grew up, where we went to school, whether we're college educated or we're not, our work experiences. what we choose to do for work, all of those things make up those differences that drive our people and our perspectives when it comes into this workplace. And so when we are addressing diversity at an organizational level, we are looking at the entire human experience within the organization. But what does equity mean? And I love this chart, and we didn't create this, but it really is sometimes when people use equity, they're really talking about equality or vice versa. But when we talk about equity, it's about promoting justice. It's about promoting impartiality and fairness in our policies, our procedures, and our practices. And the reason we call out the practices, because your practice is who you are. It's what gets done and how things get done. So you can have great policies, you can spend a lot of time refining it, but how people adopt it and use it is truly what gets embedded in your culture. And so when we think about equity, it's great when we all get the same thing, but when we truly understand that we're not all starting from the same place, we will think a little bit differently about how we solve for that challenge. And it really is about helping people get the resources, the tools, whatever they need in order to level that playing field so that we can all get the equality that we're looking for in the workplace. And then the I. The I is so powerful. When we think about inclusion, it is really how you make diversity and equity work. Because inclusion is this creation and the support of an environment that not only accepts difference, but it really begins to celebrate it. When we think about our decision-making process, when we think about doing things that are for the greater good of your organizations, that is the power for inclusion. It's about creating those open and safe spaces. And we're going to talk about why that even matters and why are we talking about those things at work later, because remember, culture is about driving results and how we create these competitive advantages in our workplaces. But it really is, at the end of the day, is being able to give people the opportunity to have this strong sense of belonging. And guess what? Having the strong sense of belonging is what propels people forward. It's what helps them drive. It's what helps them bring their innovative ideas into the workspace. And again, if it's about how we remain competitive, these are the things that we need in the workplace in order to accomplish some of that. And so I will say it was shared that I've been at the bank for 30 plus years. Much of my time was spent in bank operations. And so I say to my team all the time, at the end of the day, I'm a math person. And when it comes to this business case for DEI, to me, it's about math. It really is about understanding what is going on in our environment, whether you're a national company, whether you are US based. It is truly beginning to look at the data and let the data tell the story about what is going on in our workforce, within our communities, and in our economies. And so this is a chart, and it is a McKinsey chart. And we like to look at McKinsey data because they provide the information that is needed by surveying employers. And what it really talks about is, the business sense around what is driving performance, what is helping propel organizations. And it is statistically and factual and financially proven that DEI drives business growth. And since 2015, McKinsey has completed its annual survey. And what do they look at? They look at year over year performance of how organizations are doing, especially when it comes to the makeup of that organization, because again, it's about how innovative you are, how many different perspectives are you bringing into this space. So whether it's a multitude of things, gender, lived experience, ethnicity, all of those things, what is it doing to help propel and drive performance? And what this is showing is that those organizations that are well represented by females, especially at those higher levels of the organization, think about the decision makers, they are 39% more likely to outperform organizations. Okay. And again, if this is about making money and being innovative and maintaining your niche, this is something that an organization wants to think about. And when it comes to ethnic diversity representation, 39%, and you can sort of see the growth year over year that organizations are experiencing when they make this a part of their overall business strategy. But what's going on within our nation? When we think about our customers and when we think about the pipeline for candidates, this is just US Census data. And what the population is showing us that since 2010 to even 2019, they did the last census around that time, is that the US grew by a total of about 19 million people. And that's great. But when we think about what is driving that growth in that population, a lot of the growth, over 10 million people have identified as being Hispanic. And so while we're continuing to grow, this country is just becoming more racial, ethnically diverse. And so if you're thinking about where are my customers are and what are the things that are concerning them, understanding basic things about the changing within our nation are super important. But some things that you also have to drill down and know is that you've got the Hispanic population that will be the largest growing ethnic minority. It's going to grow, projected to grow, the only population that's projected to grow from 6 to 24% over the next 20 years. So as you're thinking about your products, your services, how can you be more intentional? Banks in particular are thinking about their outreach to Hispanic and Latin communities. And thinking about the products and the services that this community will need in order to drive. Again, it's about how can you maintain your business growth year over year. The same thing when we think about other populations. It's understanding some of that data in order to know how to market your products, where to go target products. The Hispanic population is also the fastest growing population when it comes to small businesses. And so being able to connect and understand how your companies support these small businesses is also how you maintain that competitive advantage. And then what else do we know about this population? If you're on this call, you probably are having a birthday this year or already had a birthday this year. But what's happening from a generational perspective? What are we learning with this data is that this country is becoming more racial, ethnically diverse when it comes to our younger populations. And if you want to know if you fall into those younger populations, those that are 42 and younger, or our millennials, our Gen Z, and I think we're up to Gen A. And so while we're getting younger, we're smaller in our overall growth. I talked about that 19 million. But what we're starting to see is that we've got this generational divide in the makeup of the country. And I didn't do make up that term, this cultural generational gap. Economists did. But what we've got are our retiring baby boomers who, what do they expect? They expect to have some solvency in our government supported retirement and medical care programs. And then we've got this younger group of people who are coming into the workplace. And we know that when they're coming in and they identify as different ethnicities, we as employers in particular have to be more intentional in how we are attracting our talent. How are we helping upskill people? Because again, we've got this gap. We need the workers, and there are fewer of them, in order to be able to make sure that we think about how we're paying for things like Social Security. And I promise you, I don't work for the government. Hopefully everything is there, but that's what employers have to think about, or some of those challenges. But what else are we seeing? When it comes to work, women are majority within that workforce at 48%. But what are we finding when it comes to how people navigate that career pipeline? Well, we're finding some things that we've got this broken rung, which has held women back for the 9th consecutive year. And what that is impacting is this path to the C-suite. And back to, if we think about the businesses that are thriving, that are getting that 39% growth, employers have to be thinking about tangible ways in which they are working with their talent. Because if people feel like they can't grow their careers within an organization, they're more likely to lean out. And again, it's about the war on talent and being more intentional in how we grow and develop our talent so that we retain them in order to help us get results. And then I share this because as employers, sometimes there's a disconnect between what we may feel employers or employees are looking for versus how they actually feel about work. And so back in 2021, I think everybody will remember we had this great attrition, and it was impacting work, and people learned a lot during the pandemic that impacted the entire world. And so we had this migration of talent. And again, if this is about becoming a culture and an organization that is able to retain its talent, its competitive advantage, we really have to begin to think about what are people looking for. And what this grid shows is there's a disconnect between what employers understand that employees, why they're leaving. And if we were able to close that gap, this would help with this great talent attraction. And so employers were thinking it was more transitional or transactional relationships. People were looking for just the pay and the financial perks and work-life balance. And the one thing that I will say is pay is table stakes. If you are out there recruiting talent, people want to be paid a fair wage. But what they missed are some of the more relational elements that would have helped someone stay within an organization. They missed that people are focused on their sense of purpose. They want these social and interpersonal connections. None of these things cost money, right? They want this strong sense of belonging and shared identity. And so when I'm talking about DEI, sometimes we get caught up in the feel-good aspect. No, this is really about what will help us retain our talent and, most importantly, our competitive advantage. And I love this one. People want to feel valued by their organization and manager. If you were on this call and you're like, I don't care about being valued, I would question that. Who doesn't want to feel valued for their uniqueness and to be able to feel like they can fully contribute at work? And so it's great to know what is going on in the nation and in our economy, but what can we as business owners and employers do and employees do within our own span of control? What I say is what gets measured gets done. Having a really robust way to find out how are people experiencing your company or your organization is key. We do annual employee surveys, and the things that we are being intentional in looking for is engagement and asking questions related to engagement. How are people experiencing the culture, their teams, work life, things, all of that. Enablement. Do they have the right tools they need in order to be able to thrive? Their sense of belonging. We know that this is a result of being in an inclusive environment, but we still measure annually how people are responding. And then most importantly, how is this driving intent to remain? Later, when I talk about our ERGs, I'm going to talk about how we bring that all together and we can real time see the impact of what is it doing to the organization. How is it able to sort of contribute to the bottom line? But then being able to slice this data and look at it from a social identity lens to find out how different communities within your organization or experiencing the organization are key to help you go figure out how do you drive results at the end of the day. Because if you're surveying them, your people are looking for, and what are you going to do with that data? And speaking of our journey, I shared, I've been at Commerce over 30 years. And what I'm proud of is I've had a front row seat when it comes to sort of experiencing our journey with this work, starting back in 2004, from when we made our first company-wide statement around why inclusion even matters. why we want to go focus on this. How do we want to embed it in our recruiting and our succession planning, our community involvement, and all of our internal communications, to how we've built out and created a role of someone who's supporting those efforts and giving strategic leadership. Think about being a steward of the bank's goals, until doing our first workshops and talking about things that we probably hadn't talked about at work before, but addressing the needs of the team members, to having John Kemper sign our CEO action for diversity and inclusion pledge, which says that we're going to share our best practices. So even as I'm talking to you today, this is a part of our commitment, because this is a space we're not all competing in. If we can learn something from each other, we make our communities even better. And then from, how do we go out and we be more intentional in thinking about our diverse suppliers, to launching our first employee resource groups, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, to creating programming. When I said we're not all starting from the same place, finding opportunities in our development programs to address specific needs, to rolling out our councils, and to making DEI a corporate blue chip, which I will share about, as there are some people on this call that have worked on those committees, and then expanding and growing our team, so that we can continue the work and the effort. Because at the end of the day, if you are embedding this work and this strategy into your culture, you've got to find ways to make it long-term and sustainable. And everyone in your organization has to be living it, not just specific segments of your organization. And so I always say that our efforts take a village. And even though we made diversity, equity, and inclusion a corporate blue chip back in 2020, I will tell you that it wasn't just a small group of people. It wasn't just talent management. It was people like Jay Phillips, I see you, working on our internal pillars, working on our community pillars, our customer pillars, and our supplier pillars, because it's great to go fix your internal organization, but culture is lived and experienced by others externally. Think about your brand and that brand awareness. And so we started with 70 plus people from all over our organization that were assigned to these 4 pillars. We came up with key performance indicators. We aligned around what was the work that we wanted to go do. You can boil an ocean trying to make progress, but you've got to have a way to benchmark your performance to see where you are. McKinsey or Deloitte, forgive me, Nikki can put it in the chat, which one of them, they have this continuum, this spectrum that talks about where people are in their DI journey, organizations. And we even leverage some of those learnings to figure out, based off of some of the criteria, where do we see ourselves and how do we want to see ourselves moving across this continuum in a steady way. And when I tell you it takes time for things to take root, that's what we learned, is that it is a marathon and not a sprint. But I'm really proud to say that we've had a lot of support from across the entire organization to make sure that we were focused on some of the efforts that are listed there. And when we think about internal, when we think about being focused on enhancing our talent, mobility, thinking about where we're recruiting from and our practices, how do we get some of that diversity on our team? It's great. The census data tells us that the world is changing. You will go and attract that talent. And remember, diversity is people in perspective. But once they get within your organization, what are you going to do to retain them? And so thinking more deeply in how you invest in your talent, this was a strategy. We had to think about, there are some people who are great individual contributors. How do we support them? There are people who, are exploring leadership. What would it look like if you were an aspiring manager? Once you get there, how do we support you as a leader? And so we had to take this equity lens to all of our programming and find more intentional ways in order to build programming that applies to our talent, and lets people know that we are truly invested in their career growth within this organization. One of the things that we talk about is our Women in Leadership program. We identified that career pipeline gap. If I promise you, if you hold that up to most organizations, it's typically the same thing where we've got that broken rung. And so, how can we invest in our talent to help them overcome some of those challenges, whether it's relationship, whether it's one-on-one coaching and things of that nature? Again, there's no one size fits all, but it's figuring out where you're having your greatest challenges and figuring out how to go solve from those things from a systemic manner. We talked about customers with our 4-pillar strategy. And when we think about our customers, if we're here to help you focus on what matters most, we know that that looks different for every person. And so when we think about this path to home ownership, when we think about the equity gap, a lot of that comes from when communities don't have a large number of homeowners. So being able to take innovation when it comes to designing our products and thinking about, maybe people that are in low to moderate incomes, and what do we need to do when it comes to home lending? What are some of the community groups that we can partner with in order to figure out what is creating some of those barriers? And how do we go solve for it in a way that it allows us to support our community and turn them into customers? Again, this is really about doing the right thing and also making sure that we are being intentional in growing and sustaining our business. And so these are some of the efforts from the community pillar, thinking more differently about our customers and what their needs are. We talked about community. We want to reflect the community around us, and we want to take a listening ear to the community and not assuming that we know how to solve for everything. But that path to generational wealth sometimes is about financial education. We didn't all get taught the same lessons. I was sharing with someone at the age of 16, my mom gave me her checkbook. I would never do this with my children because they don't even know how to write a check. But that my mom gave me her checkbook and she was like, you are going to go pay the bills. And so I had to keep that check ledger, and you had to write in ink so you can see it. And she would just put down what her check amount was, and I went and paid those bills. Well, that was my financial education. But a lot of people may not have access to that information. And so, how can we level the playing field and apply an equity lens to it? Well, this pillar went and created some roles, community outreach and banking officers. And now we've got our commerce team members that are equipped to take their financial education curriculum and put it in our community so that we can have lasting impact. Again, it takes a village, and it takes putting some strategy around it. When we think about our supplier pillar efforts, when you truly understand that some business owners may have different challenges than others, that all businesses aren't created the same way, being able to listen to your suppliers or to be able to listen to businesses in the community allows you to solve for things a little bit differently. And why do we care? Because we're already spending money in the community as a mid-sized employer, but we want to make sure that we are amplifying in our dollars within our communities, because when the community is better and it is more financially, sustainable, then guess what? That grows the economies. And that is how we as a business continue to win and thrive. And so again, it makes business sense that we go focus on some of those things. I do want to turn a lens back to the employee focus, because this is why Sarah Larson invited me in the first place. And I want to talk about the intentionality in thinking differently about how people experience the organization. And so employee resource groups, or ERGs, we've had for the past 8 to 9 years. And for us, what it has meant is that we get to apply a different lens and understanding that our employees just aren't our employees, but that they have real life outside of work. And so when we are able to establish our employee resource groups, They are all formed off of the passion of the employees. And they have to have certain merits because we are trying to meet a business and an employee needs. And then they get to share feedback. They get to become advocates for others because it is so important that as you are having or establishing your employee resource groups, that they are a mix of both those populations that you're targeting as well as allies, because allyship and advocacy is how we make work better because we build our understanding of each other and that we as team members all have unique needs. And that carries over to how we solve for our customers and how we solve for our communities. I'm proud to say that 44% of our employees participate in one or more ERGs. And we are 57% women within commerce. And out of that, 70% of our women are members of an ERG, not just our RISE ERG. And I'll say what these are a little later, but they are a part of so many other ERGs. But the power of this is that back to the surveying, we're able to annually see how our team members that are members of the ERG are responding, how people who are not members of the ERG are responding, and consistently without fail, those members that are a part of one or more ERGs, they report a higher level of engagement. They report a higher sense of community, or excuse me, sense of belonging, and increasing their intent to remain. And so if it's back to how we invest our resources within an organization, these are the things that help your business remain more viable. And so we've got 6 ERGs at Commerce, and not just in some of our bigger markets, but even within our community markets, they form their own chapters. And when we think about our Emerge group, they're supporting young professional and allies. Our Enable, which is our newest ERG, is focused on supporting our team members who may have a disability, whether it's a parent or non-a-parent, as well as caregivers and allies. And I'll talk a little bit later about just the growing number of persons who identify as a person with a disability. Our Pride ERG supports our LGBTQ plus team members and their allies. Our RISE group supports women and allies. And then our Salute group supports our veterans. You could still be an active duty service member, as well as be a military family and our allies. And then our group, which was mentioned earlier, Vibe, supports our multicultural team members. We've got members that are from different countries all over the world. And this is a group that gets together along with allies, and we are learning from each other, whether it's keynote speakers, mentorship programs, book clubs, opportunities for education and sponsorship, because we take our efforts and we put them back in the community. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but the big thing is as you are thinking about, an ERG or a BRG, a business resource group, having some structure to this, because you've got volunteers who bring their passion, but they also bring their passion and they've got a day job. And so having a good structure for us is what I really feel helps us to be able to sustain this work and make the workload more manageable. Again, there's no one size fits all, but this is the structure that we figured out has sort of helped us to be able to grow and thrive. And when I think about our ERG leaders, they are by far some of the more passionate people. But if you are establishing it, we talk about how good it is for an organization, but to be able to invest in them is equally important. Some of them may be leaders already, and some of them may be individual contributors, but being able to provide them with a leadership development program in order for them to continue to grow, to be able to give them opportunities to connect with senior leaders in the organization to help them build those relationships in order to influence, whether it's policies and practice, but also think about that next promotion opportunity to invite them into things in the community, and to make sure that they've got access to some training. Again, as we think about the people who are helping sustain your culture, this is the community that is doing that. We also focus from a DEI perspective is on education. And I never make the assumption that any one person knows anything. And so what we call them is, or what we say is that everybody is in their own space and place on their DEI journey. And we truly mean that, because it is as much about creating a safe space for our team members, giving them grace so that they can grow and learn. If you haven't had a lived experience, it may be harder for you to relate and understand some of those challenges that a team member can be having. And so, how do you create community and learning opportunities? And so, whether it's individual learning, one-on-one, whether it's group workshops or team journeys, whether it's videos, whether it's workshop classes, whether it's those book club discussions that we talked, or that I talked about earlier, we find multiple ways to meet people where they are. Because as Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. And so we want to make sure that our team members know that they've had that safe space in order to grow and to learn. And when I say safe spaces, psychological safety when it comes to being on a team, being know that you're not going to be punished for making mistakes, or you're not going to be judged for something, that it's okay to bring, your vulnerability into this space. That is probably one of the greatest keys for determining if someone has a sense of belonging, and if they have the ability to feel like they can come in and innovate with different products, if they can bring ideas to the table. It determines performance. And so when we're talking about these things, it just isn't the feel good aspect of it. It really is, because these are things that will help, if worked on, that will help us grow from our business perspective. We talk about checking your bias. And a lot of people will come into the space and say, I don't have bias. But scientists will tell you that if you've got a brain, you've got a bias. And so even though I talk about it all the time, I am included in that, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias. But if left unchecked, it could really get in the way of how we get results. When we talk about things like uncovering in the workplace, well, what are people covering? And I grew up in a time where you probably didn't talk about some of the personal aspects of work, but we had a whole pandemic and it was hard to separate work life from home life. Well, when it comes to disabilities in the workplace, and we focus on educating people about that, 61 million people in the US have either an apparent or non-apparent disability. That's 1 in 4 Americans. And so we don't just unclothe ourselves and come into our workplaces and everything is fine. We are bringing all of those things into work, and it could be impacting performance. It could be impacting, a team dynamic. And so when we're able to talk and learn from people, we're able to address some of those issues head on. And I cannot talk about covering enough, because, a lot of people will feel like, well, is it really everyone? I promise you, we are all somehow toning down parts of our identity that we don't bring into the workplace. Now, does it all impact how you perform? It could, or it could not. But for most people, they report that they have covered one or more aspects of our identity. And, how does that relate? Even 45% of our men, white men, report covering one or more aspects of their identity. And so when we are solving for what you may feel are a certain group or population, we are really solving for it all, because it really is about how can we be more effective as team members, as leaders. And speaking of leaders, if there are people who aspire to be leaders, if we've got leaders on the call, one of the things that we've been intentional about is thinking about resources for our leaders. How do we help them on their journeys? Because we already showed the demographics and we know that work, the community is looking different. We've got census data that shows that it's different, that we're solving differently for our customer needs. Why is it important that we think more deeply about creating these inclusive environments? Well, it goes back to overall performance. When team members feel like they belong, they report 56% improvement in job performance, 50% lower in turnover risk. Imagine the cost of onboarding a new employee or having turnover. That is a direct hit to your bottom line. And they report 75% fewer sick days. So back to culture and why it matters is this is having a direct impact, almost 52 million in savings when we've got a 75% in reduced time spent away from work. And how do we know that we are creating those spaces where people feel like they can grow and they can thrive? Well, we create those resources that kind of helps us understand what it looks like when we have a more inclusive workplace. We give voice to ways that people can think differently about their bias and how it may show up at work. We want our leaders to help drive that strong sense of belonging on their team so that people have that psychological safety, that employees feel like they can trust their leaders, that they care about them not only as an individual, but when it comes to how they show up on a team. Now, does that mean every good idea gets implemented? Absolutely not. But that we've created a communication about how ideas are birthed when we disagree about something, and that we are having these courageous conversations that really have a great influence on someone's ability to feel like they belong. And when we think about our diversity efforts, we understand, that belonging continues to evolve for someone. And we know that that's an important part of inclusion, back to where we started on why those definitions matter. But Anita Sands says that diversity is a fact. The numbers are what they are, and we kind of went over the numbers. Inclusion is a choice for employers. You truly get to decide whether to include someone or not. But belonging is that feeling. And it can be enforced by a culture that you intentionally and purposefully create. And so that is something that we definitely have control over as we think about how this equates to work. And so the last thing that I will leave you with, because I do want to leave time for questions, is this: when we've talked about company culture and why it matters, but those truly great workplace cultures, they've got belonging at the heart of it. When our employees feel like they belong, employers have to demonstrate that they care with their actions. So it's not what you say, it's what you do. And this gets us back to some of the basics that we want to treat all of our employees with respect, taking action on their feedback. I talked about the employee survey aspect. Recognizing their contributions are a way to truly show employees that they matter. And we can expect our employees to feel like they've got well-being and let alone thrive if we've not set up those types of environments. And so what is my ask of you all is, when it really comes to a call to action, I want you to think about this picture here. I want you to take a mental picture of this image with you, because I want you to remember a time maybe in your life where you felt excluded and how that made you feel. Whether you were picked last for something, you felt invisible, unsupported, or that your opinions or your ideas were not valued. That probably didn't leave you feeling like you mattered, like you were important. And it's hard enough to endure that for a short period of time, right? But imagine if you had to endure that for 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. So as you take this mental image with you, I want you to really think about, what can you personally do to make sure that you, at an individual level, don't make people feel that way, feel excluded. whether it's in your meetings, whether it's how you schedule things, whether you're thinking about your project plans. I want you to ask yourself, who's missing from the table? Back to, it's about people in perspective. I want you to think about, have all your voices been heard? That's the inclusion aspect. And then I want you to think about, do people really feel welcome to express their true feelings without retribution? Are you creating those spaces where people feel like they are psychologically safe? And lastly, have you built trust with your team, your coworkers, your peers? Because regardless of what you do, we all have an opportunity to create this sense of belonging in our environments. And so I'm going to pause myself and I'm going to see if there are any questions about anything that we covered today. I do lean into silence. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see folks. All right. Well, I don't see any questions. Lindsay, do you want me to turn it back over to you?
Well, thank you. I think a lot of people, it's just a lot of things to think about as well, and what they can bring back to their companies, and even just for them personal selves, I think was phenomenal. So I can't thank you enough for joining us and doing this presentation. But yeah, and nobody has any questions or comments or anything.
I don't have a question, but I did want to comment on, there was one slide you put up about the diversity. It says not diversity, equity versus equality. I really liked that one. It was, the picture was like, I don't know. There was no words. I just really liked that one. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's what we're trying to solve for. And sometimes we miss those things. And so it's a health equity visual. But I'm with you, Donna. When you think about it that way, it's like, don't we want everyone to be able to thrive if we're giving you, resources and tools anyway? I want to give you the right thing that will help you be able to be successful or to feel like you're a part. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Enjoy being with you.
Thank you, Felecia. I just wanted to thank you for your support and for all of this that you're sharing. This is our first in this series, and, this is information that I think a lot of people are going to look back on. So I thank you so much, and the shadow that you cast for our company. Thank you. And to Nikki too. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and week. And then, we'll be having more of our diversity, equity, inclusion series throughout the year. But thanks to Felecia for kicking us off on such a great note.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hey.
Okay. Well, let me know.